Tekken and Dead or Alive have both left a significant mark on the fighting game genre, each pushing boundaries in their own way. Building on the foundation laid by Virtua Fighter, Tekken set the gold standard for 3D fighters, with its deep, fluid combat system and cinematic storytelling. Meanwhile, Dead or Alive carved out its own space with lightning-fast gameplay, its revolutionary use of interactive stages, and innovations in jiggle physics. It's a true series of culture. However, what many don't realise is that beyond their contributions to the genre, the rivalry between these two franchises runs deeper than simple competition. What began as a battle for market dominance soon escalated into an ongoing war of petty antics, public jabs, and cheeky decisions being made, amounting to some of the most blatant trolling in fighting game development history. So with that in mind, buckle up as we dive headfirst into yet another fiery rabbit hole, this time unravelling the freshly unearthed rivalry between the controversial Katsuhiro Harada and the turbulent Tomonobu Itagaki. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the bitter rivalry of Tekken vs Dead or Alive. Yeah. Let's be honest, there is no one quite like Katsuhiro Harada. His outspoken personality, trademark sunglasses, and direct engagement with the community have made him one of the most recognisable faces in gaming. Simply put, if you know fighting games, you know Harada. His influence is undeniable, and his legacy speaks for itself. In Tekken 8, Harada serves as the executive producer and director, overseeing every major aspect of the game's development. Tekken 8 delivers the best online experience the series has ever seen, making competitive play smoother and more accessible. Harada's leadership has helped ensure that Tekken 8 is one of the defining fighting games of this generation. It's easily a must-play. Speaking of the best, you can grab an absolutely ridiculous 64% off this game using my affiliate link, a bonkers 74% off Street Fighter 6, and even a huge discount on the Year 2 Character Pass featuring Mai Shiranui. Save big on thousands of games via the pinned comment, and scoop up some of the greatest titles for next to nothing. Happy shopping and enjoy the savings. While many of us love the Tekken series, one man has historically felt quite the opposite, or so it appeared. I'm talking about Tomonobu Itagaki, the creator, director and producer of the Dead or Alive series during its most influential years. As the head of Team Ninja at Tecmo, he played a crucial role in shaping the franchise from its inception in 1996, driving its unique identity and gameplay innovations. As illustrated by this X-post highlighting an old screen grab from oneup.com, Itagaki in no particular order lists his 5 most hated games. These consist of Tekken, Tekken 2, Tekken 3, Tekken 4 and Tekken 5. Ouch. Commenting on the 5th entry, he states, "I no longer can figure out what the hell they're trying to do with the numbering, and I don't know which one is which. I don't know what they're trying to do with all of these spin-offs, so this includes Nina Death by Degrees as well. Comment below if you want to see a video on that hot mess at some point." He then scathingly adds, "I don't think it even needs saying, but people should stay away from Tekken. Nothing left to say. I just don't want them to disappoint me anymore. It's so annoying. Please don't annoy me anymore." Katsuhiro Harada took notice of this X-post and not only acknowledged the intense rivalry but also provided a detailed account of some of the most heated encounters between these larger-than-life personalities. So buckle up as we've got a lot of petty gaming history to get through. To set the scene, let me first take you back to the 90s, to around the time the first Dead or Alive game was announced. Harada is making his way home from a game show when he spots the Virtua Fighter team. Yes, the very folks behind the game that practically birthed the 3D fighting genre. As fate would have it, who else should wander into the scene but the ever flamboyant and eternally sunglasses clad Tomonobu Itagaki, the mastermind behind what would become a jiggle physics juggernaut. That's right, my dear viewer, we had the Tekken, Virtua Fighter and Dead or Alive developers all in the same place purely by chance. Now, what do you do when the gods of gaming align like this? Well, if you're in Tokyo, the answer is simple. You go out drinking. So off they went to Izakaya in Shinjuku, where Harada and the Sega AM2 lads quickly got into deep discussions about what everyone talks about on late nights out drinking: animation control techniques. Now, as it turns out, Namco had, let's say, acquired a few engineers from Sega back in the day, and with them came certain trade secrets regarding animation control. But here's the kicker: while Namco initially benefited from this knowledge, the Tekken team would later go on to develop their own groundbreaking animation control technology entirely from scratch. And here's where things get even more fascinating. This work wouldn't just shape Tekken's future, it would become the very foundation of Bandai Namco's entire approach to human animation and action control. That's right, without Tekken, Bandai Namco's modern animation tech wouldn't even exist. In fact, Harada even claims that without these early developments, they wouldn't have been able to co-develop Super Smash Bros. With Masahiro Sakurai. That's right, Tekken's legacy extends far beyond the King of the Iron Fist tournament. But back to that fateful night where the group had found themselves bonding over drinks in Shinjuku, while Harada and the Sega lads geeked out over animation tech, Itagaki sat back, listening with great interest. Now, one might assume that he was merely absorbing knowledge to implement into Dead or Alive, but in reality, the man was just as invested in the people around him as he was in the technology itself. After a while, the conversation shifted to more casual, non-work related topics, and it was here that a moment unfolded that Harada still remembers to this day. Itagaki, sunglasses undoubtedly still glued to his face despite being indoors, suddenly turned to him and said, "Mr. Harada, you're a really approachable and funny person." Harada notes that at this stage the two still addressed each other with the utmost politeness, like two respectable businessmen rather than future bitter rivals, adding that they didn't know much about each other yet, and their relationship was very professional and gentlemanly at that time. But oh, how things would change. Fast forward a few months and Harada found himself once again at a gaming event, wandering through the crowd when suddenly, who should approach him but Itagaki? But this time Itagaki had an all-new revelation to share. Itagaki would remark, "Harada, you went to Waseda University, didn't you?" Now Harada, understandably caught off guard, responded with a cautious, yes. To which Itagaki confidently declared, "I also went to Waseda, and our time there overlapped. That makes you my junior!" insinuating that the power dynamic between the two had just shifted. Harada, not entirely convinced, replied, "I might be your junior, but I don't think we were there at the same time." But Itagaki, ever the wildcard, hit him with the perfect explanation. No, you see, I was so busy playing mahjong every day that it took me 7 years to graduate. I'm sure we were there at the same time. In fact, I remember you. You were captain of the yacht club team, weren't you? Now, let's just pause here for a moment, dear viewers. Itagaki, known for his rebellious rock star-like image, had just casually admitted to stretching his university stay to an absolutely majestic 7 years, purely due to his deep and unwavering commitment to gambling. And somehow, in the midst of all of that, he had taken note of young Harada, not as a fellow game developer, but as a guy who spent his time racing yachts. From here, things only got spicier. Now that Itagaki had done his research and confirmed his seniority, all formalities between the two were immediately dropped. Hilariously, gone were the polite exchanges, gone was the mutual respect of professional equals, and from that day forward, Itagaki treated Harada like his personal junior, speaking to him in the most casual, almost condescending way a senior could address a junior in Japanese culture. And thus the dynamic between these two fighting game titans was permanently changed. So what began as an innocent night of drinks between two future gaming industry legends would soon evolve into one of the most wonderfully petty rivalries in gaming history. And trust me, there is so much more to this stupid story. But to understand further, according to Harada at least, we need a better insight into Itagaki's strategy towards success. So let's dive in. Itagaki wasn't just a game designer, nor was he merely a director. He was a producer through and through. And by producer, I don't just mean someone overseeing a project, I mean a man who thought about the big picture, the brand, and most importantly, how to make Dead or Alive an absolute spectacle that could rival Tekken. To understand the scale of what Itagaki was up against, we must step back into a time when the arcade scene was still the beating heart of the fighting game industry. Back then, two giants reigned supreme, Sega and Namco. Now, what made these two powerhouses so dominant? Not only did they develop fighting games, but they also owned and operated their own arcade chains, both domestically and internationally. They controlled the distribution, the publishing, and the entire infrastructure. Simply put, they weren't just making games, they controlled how those games reached players. And Tecmo? Well, Tecmo had none of that. As a much smaller company, Tecmo simply didn't have the arcade empire, or the vast marketing resources that Namco and Sega did. Itagaki knew this. He understood that if DOA tried to go head to head with Tekken, purely in terms of arcade distribution, it would be game over before the fight even started. So, what did he do? Instead of relying on traditional marketing like Sega and Namco, Itagaki played an entirely different game. One based on media manipulation, controversy, and spectacle, rather than just advertising Dead or Alive through conventional means. He sought to make headlines by any means necessary. Print media, internet media, oh yes, he tapped into them all. He understood that in the rising digital age, attention was the real currency. And so, what was one of his most brilliant marketing strategies? Well, he went out of his way to call out Tekken directly, criticising its game design, its mechanics, and anything else that would get a reaction. Now, to the untrained eye, this may have seemed like typical developer ego clashing, but oh no, this was calculated. Itagaki wanted people talking about Dead or Alive in the same breath as Tekken, even if it was through controversy. Because here's the reality: if a scrappy underdog picks a fight with a big dog, people pay attention. It appeared that despite having an outwardly emotional, rebellious image, Itagaki had a cold, calculated mind when it came to business and strategy. He knew how to leverage controversy to elevate Dead or Alive beyond what Tecmo's limited marketing budget could ever achieve. Due to partaking in such a strategy, Harada notes that the Tekken team were initially baffled, but as things escalated, things began to get even uglier very quickly. In fact, at one point, an entire 2-page spread in a Japanese gaming magazine was dedicated solely to Itagaki ripping Tekken apart. But this wasn't just some vague critique of game mechanics. He called out Tekken and Katsuhiro Harada himself by name, delivering a scorched earth takedown in one of the most aggressive interviews of its time. And if you think that was bad, wait until you hear what happened next. You see, it appeared Itagaki wasn't content with just stirring the pot in Japan. Oh no. As it would soon become apparent that he decided to escalate things further, this time targeting Western gaming media. Here he ramped up his Tekken bashing in overseas magazines and internet gaming outlets, critiquing the game and Harada himself even more harshly. And while this was happening, what was Harada doing? Well, absolutely nothing apparently. His bosses at Namco strictly ordered him to remain silent. That's right, no response, no rebuttal, not even a cheeky little jab back at Itagaki. For an entire decade, roughly from the late 90s until around 2007, the situation remained the same. Itagaki remained loud and relentless, constantly taking shots at Tekken and Harada, while Harada was forced into radio silence, watching as Itagaki publicly dunked on him year after year. And let's be honest, for a personality as big as Harada's, this must have driven him absolutely insane. Harada commented that looking back, it's clear that under these circumstances there was absolutely no chance for Mr. Itagaki and me to develop a friendly relationship. In fact, during those 10 years, I spent much of my time wondering, why is Mr. Itagaki so fixated on targeting and attacking me? However, between all of this, some even stranger incidents would occur. So let's rewind to 1998. Out of absolutely nowhere, Itagaki personally called Namco and asked for Harada by name. Now let's put this into context. Up until this point, Itagaki had spent years trashing Tekken in the media, had discovered Harada was his university junior, and had generally treated him with the kind of respect you give to a younger sibling, meaning none at all. So when Harada heard that Itagaki was personally requesting him, he was quite understandably completely baffled. Cautiously, he picked up the phone, wondering what this madman had to say, with him suspiciously asking, "Could you come to Tecmo's headquarters? Just you, alone." Yes, that's right. This lunatic summoned Harada like a high school delinquent, calling the first year behind the gym for a chat. Quite rightly, Harada, unsure whether he was about to get ambushed or just extremely confused, briefly considered declining. But in the end, curiosity got the better of him, so off he went alone to Tecmo HQ the very next day. But little did he know things would not go as expected. When Harada arrived, Itagaki himself greeted him and led him into a small, dimly lit room. And there in the centre stood something covered by a cloth. It appeared that Itagaki had set the stage, and like a magician preparing for the grand reveal, he suddenly whipped the cloth away with a flourish, and beneath it, an arcade cabinet and CRT monitor showcasing something never before seen by the public, a development build of Dead or Alive 2. "You're the first outsider to see this screen," Itagaki declared, clearly relishing the moment. And while the game itself was impressive for its time, Harada was more bewildered by Itagaki's dramatic stage performance than anything else. But make no mistake, this meeting was not just for show. Itagaki had an agenda. Harada would later establish that Itagaki had two key objectives in calling him to Tecmo HQ. The first of these was that he wanted Namco to buy more DOA boards. At the time, Sega and Namco were the biggest buyers of arcade hardware because they operated massive arcade chains. Normally a developer would go through Namco's sales team to push arcade boards, but Itagaki, he wanted Harada's validation. If Harada, a fellow developer, showed genuine interest or approval of Dead or Alive 2, he believed it could push Namco to buy more Dead or Alive 2 boards for their arcades, but more importantly, he just wanted to test Harada's reaction. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess this is where the true pettiness shines. Itagaki wasn't just showing off Dead or Alive 2, he was actively gauging Harada. If Harada dismissed Dead or Alive 2, Itagaki would take that as confirmation that Tekken was superior. But if Harada showed any sign of being impressed or even slightly caught off guard, Itagaki would see it as a proof that Dead or Alive 2 had shaken the Tekken team. And so with his trap set, he handed Harada the controls and said, "Alright, give it a try." This essentially functioned as the most awkward playtest ever. Harada, now fully aware that he was walking into some kind of bizarre psychological battle, sat down, picked Kasumi, and began playing. But before he could even get past 3 punches, Itagaki leaned in uncomfortably close and asked, "Well, what do you think?" That's right, 3 button presses into the match, and Itagaki was already demanding instant validation. Harada, once again caught off guard, had no idea what to say. What could he possibly judge from 3 punches? So, on instinct, he simply replied, "It feels good to play." And at that moment, Itagaki's entire plan came together. Instead of questioning how Harada could form an opinion so quickly, he immediately responded, "See, I told you, Harada!" And with that, he considered the battle won. Harada comments that at that moment, I was genuinely confused. Was he serious? Was this some kind of hidden camera prank? To be fair, Dead or Alive 2 was already demonstrating impressive technical achievements for its time, even in its unfinished state. However, his insistence on immediate feedback and constant explanations while I played left me overwhelmed with information. Later I learned from my former Team Ninja member that after my visit, Itagaki returned to the development floor and declared, "Today we beat Tekken." While I was merely startled by his approach, he took it as proof that I was overwhelmed by DOA 2's performance. This, my friends, seems to be peak Tomonobu Itagaki. If you thought Itagaki's Tekken rivalry was just a case of public trash talk and over-the-top bravado, then you have severely underestimated this man's obsession. Because, as it turns out, Itagaki wasn't just talking about war, he was waging one. Years later, Itagaki openly admitted to Harada that he had felt an enormous sense of accomplishment from his media strategy. And why wouldn't he? His aggressive anti-Tekken campaign had significantly boosted Dead or Alive's recognition, especially in Western gaming media. This was no accident. While comparative advertising was considered tacky and frowned upon in Japan, Itagaki knew that overseas gaming outlets ate this kind of drama up. After all, what's better than a fighting game rivalry? A real rivalry between the people making them, and so Itagaki leaned into it. Hard. But what makes this story truly mad is that he wasn't just running a media campaign. He was conducting actual military-style reconnaissance on the Tekken team. Yes, really, this was a man who studied war and decided to apply those very tactics to a fighting game feud. In his personal office, Itagaki had something that would make even the most paranoid strategist proud. A full-scale chart analysing Namco's Tekken development team. Yes, he had a literal war map dedicated to studying Tekken's internal structure. He would gather intelligence by dissecting Tekken's game staff credits, obsessively mapping out the entire Tekken team, tracking their educational backgrounds, work histories, and achievements. He would analyse the order of the names in the credits, spotting trends, deducing that the top names weren't always the key technical staff. Instead, they were often managers or high-ranking senior figures, and most importantly, he zeroed in on one name that stood out: Harada. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Harada's role in the Tekken team confused Itagaki. By his logic, Harada was too young to be leading such a high-profile project. The team was filled with brilliant developers, some 10 years older, who were industry veterans, so why was this guy leading the charge? Simple. Harada was surrounded by incredibly talented senior developers who let him focus purely on design, giving him a rare level of creative freedom. And this is where Itagaki got it right. Because when the rivalry finally ended, he showed Harada his entire analysis chart, and according to Harada, it was disturbingly accurate. He had correctly identified Tekken's key developers, pinpointed their roles, and understood their influence on the project, and at that moment, Harada felt a very real and eerie realization. He had learnt that Itagaki had been watching Tekken like a war general, tracking enemy troop movements the entire time. Harada notes there is a lot of hidden genius in the way Itagaki operates, with him often truly playing the long game. While his media strategy was designed to directly oppose Tekken, his actual game development strategy was completely different. Rather than copying Tekken or trying to go head-to-head with it, Itagaki identified what Tekken didn't provide. And that is why Dead or Alive was never a Tekken clone. It was its very own beast, a very jiggly beast at that. Instead of competing on Tekken's turf, he focused on faster gameplay, more interactive stages, the now iconic counter system, and a different audience focus, including of course a certain physics engine that we do not need to elaborate on further. By deliberately filling the gaps Tekken left open, Dead or Alive carved out its own identity, and that's why it still has a devoted fan base to this day. Reflecting back on this, Harada states that during the late 90s and early 2000s, when the gaming industry had yet to establish sophisticated marketing analyses, Itagaki had a detailed understanding of Tekken's sales figures and customer demographics. Using this data, he developed strategies to elevate Dead or Alive's brand recognition by directly opposing Tekken in the media. At the same time, his product development strategy avoided head-on collisions with Tekken. Instead, he identified needs that Tekken didn't fulfill, and areas where Dead or Alive could excel technically, crafting a distinct direction for his game. This is why Dead or Alive ultimately offered gameplay and targeted a market audience different from Tekken's. After years of relentless trash talk, media stunts, and outright psychological warfare, you might expect that the Tekken vs Dead or Alive rivalry would end in a dramatic showdown. But no, it ended with a dinner invitation. Yes, in 2008, after Tomonobu Itagaki had officially left Tecmo, he did something Harada never expected. He called him again. Now, bear in mind, up to this point, their dynamic hadn't really changed in a decade. Harada still saw Itagaki as his aggressive, outspoken rival, always looking to pick a fight. So when his phone rang and it was Itagaki inviting him to dinner, Harada was understandably skeptical. Still, curiosity won again. Harada agreed. Now imagine sitting across the table from your loudest critic for the past 10 years, expecting some kind of underhanded jab, and instead you hear this: "Harada, you were my comrade in arms." Yes, that's what Itagaki said. It was at this moment that Harada finally understood how Itagaki saw their relationship. He wasn't just throwing insults for the sake of it. He wasn't personally attacking Harada. He was playing the long game, And for the first time, Itagaki fully admitted his strategy. He never actually had a grudge against Tekken, Namco or Harada himself. On the contrary, he respected them. He had to manufacture a rivalry to get Dead or Alive the attention it needed. Itagaki admitted that when I compared the power dynamics in development, sales and publishing, it was clear that a straightforward approach wouldn't work. I had to employ every strategy I could. I'm sorry for everything. Yes, this was the gaming industry equivalent of a long con. But then Itagaki flipped the conversation and started questioning Harada about Tekken strategies. After all, how had Tekken survived? What was the real keys to its success? What had Namco done that kept the series thriving while others like Virtua Fighter faded into the background? And so Harada finally opened up about his real game plan. Harada explained something that almost no other developers at the time had considered: the death of arcades in the West. See, back in the late 90s, Harada was already noticing a seismic shift. Arcades were closing down rapidly. Players were losing interest in the idea of paying per play, and the traditional 1 coin equals 1 match model was dying, and Harada knew what this meant. Fighting games had to move to home consoles if they wanted to survive. So what did he do? He travelled the world visiting arcades, meeting players, and speaking directly with arcade operators. He realised community events and grassroots tournaments were replacing arcades in the West. He began directly supporting the competitive scene, providing arcade machines and prizes all under the radar. And here's where it gets truly fascinating. At the time, no other Japanese developers were doing this. While Capcom had put Street Fighter into hibernation after Street Fighter 3, Harada was silently building relationships with tournament organisers and ensuring Tekken had a future. Examples of this include that he provided free rental cabinets for tournaments, he set up arcade machines himself without even wearing his signature sunglasses, and even bothered to observe how players are engaging with Tekken outside of Japan, something most developers never even considered doing. And Itagaki? He was stunned. What? That's not what a developer is supposed to do. Really? You're more action orientated than I expected. Itagaki that day learned the truth. Harada had been fighting a different battle entirely. The problem seems to be that Itagaki had always viewed developers in a certain way, sitting in an office, glued to monitors, finely tuning mechanics and writing code. But Harada, he was out in the field. He wasn't just making Tekken, he was securing its future. And this is why Tekken survived the fighting game winter of the 2000s, while others faded away. Virtua Fighter disappeared. Dead or Alive struggled. Street Fighter vanished for nearly a decade, but Tekken, it kept going. By the time Tekken 7 rolled around, Harada had perfected a system where arcade revenue funded console development, allowing for continuous releases without financial risk. This, combined with his early recognition of the fighting game community, meant Tekken didn't just survive, it thrived. And Itagaki, he never saw it coming. After 10 years of media warfare, Itagaki finally saw Harada's true strategy, and he was genuinely impressed. At that dinner, the two finally put their differences aside, not as rivals, but as two veterans who had fought in the same industry through its most difficult years. But this story isn't quite finished yet. After spending years orchestrating one of the pettiest rivalries in gaming history, Itagaki apparently decided, you know what, let's make this weird. And so, once a year without fail, Itagaki would ring up Harada, completely sloshed, and have a chat. What did they talk about? Who knows? Perhaps past battles, perhaps the state of the industry, perhaps just rambling nonsense fueled by too much whiskey. One thing was certain, this bizarre ritual became a yearly event. That is, until it stopped. So what does this mean? Has Itagaki moved on? Has he forgotten his old rival? Or is he simply drunk dialing someone else now? The mystery remains. Well, until Itagaki was told about Harada's ex-post regarding this feud. On Facebook, Itagaki would write, I read Harada's tweet from Bandai Namco. As some of you know, he's fighting on the front lines of the fighting game. I support you with all of my heart. Bring this epic tale to a close. What a story! Don't forget you can grab an absolutely ridiculous 64% off Tekken 8 using my affiliate link, a bonkers 74% off Street Fighter 6, and even a huge discount on the Year 2 Character Pass featuring my Shiranui. Save big on thousands of games via the pinned comment and scoop up some of the greatest titles for next to nothing. Happy shopping and enjoy the savings. Cheerio.